the Jake Giffen Podcast.
All right, imagine you're going to buy a small building. Maybe you want to do a retreat center, or you want to create art somewhere quiet, away from everybody. Enjoy your life. And the state labels it toxic. Not because you spilled anything, but because someone else did 300 feet away. That's what happened to artist Julian Raven, whose decade-long war with New York State exposed something bigger than contaminated soil. This isn't just an environmental case. It's a story about bureaucracy, bad science, and the slow erosion of truth. Wrong addresses, missing samples, laws ignored, data rewritten. And when Julian started asking questions, the system didn't clean up the mess. It buried him in it. So what happens when the protectors become the polluters? What if the contamination isn't in the ground, but in the government itself? This episode will challenge your faith in official reports, your trust in public safety, and maybe even your definition of justice. By the end, you'll see the most dangerous toxin in America isn't chemicals, it's bureaucrats. Yeah. If you're hoping to find land of your own someday, you need to hear this. Julian Raven, welcome back to the Jake Giffen Podcast. And I'll emphasize back to, you are the first returning guest we've ever had for this very important update.
Wow, Jake, what an awesome introduction there. You had me laughing because you really got it. You really got the core issues that what I'm dealing with is really why I'm doing this. So it's great to be back, and I thank you for having me on quickly to share this update. And it is a very important story because of what you just clearly said, how we as citizens, we cannot just take at face value always what we are presented with by the system. We want to, good faith, you want to just, and I'm like that, unfortunately, you want to believe and you naturally are inclined to, but then when you start to look a little bit deeper, you're like, this really needs to be examined properly.
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with the story, what is Raven versus New York? What is that? The Department of
Environmental Conservation, the DEC.
So the Department of Environmental Conservation. What is that? What is this lawsuit really, or what's the story behind it?
Well, you're prodding appropriately there. Listen, they have legitimate work to do. I live in a beautiful upstate New York town, a beautiful part of the country. But Elmira, New York was massive industry in the 1800s, late 1800s, a lot of industry. So there are and have been major polluters in this area. And the DEC has a legitimate job of going after these people, the perpetrators, trying to fix it, trying to find them, trying to clean up where there is legitimate contamination, where there are legitimate threats to the population. That's legitimate. The problem that I find, and this is where it touches on your very insightful point there, is when bureaucracies, and this is such a major problem that I keep encountering, where it's either an issue of training, it's an issue of incompetence, or it's an issue of what you also touched on, ideologies that drift into the actual mission, that cloud it from its mission, and people forget their purpose and they begin to prosecute rather than just simply assist or help the community. So my case is one of those, because I think in the majority of cases, you will find legitimate cases of contamination that the state is charged with to fix and go after the perpetrators. Excellent.
Yeah.
It's not my case.
They're important. So this all began back in 2014 when you purchased 714 Baldwin Street in Elmira. What made you realize something was fundamentally wrong with how the DEC classified your property as a contamination site?
Well, that's one of the interesting parts about this. The classification issue, I did not understand at that time. Listen, I had been in this town, this was 2014, so I'd been here since 2006, 2007. I'd had another large building here, like a warehouse. Properties in upstate New York, very affordable. This building had sat on the main thoroughfare, the main artery of the city, like condemned, abandoned, signs all over it, which are complete, and no one would touch it. So one day I had an art show in Spain, 2014. I had used this gallery's warehouse to paint. And I'd produced some of my greatest work at that time in this huge space, huge concrete floors, because I paint on the floor. I was able to roll out my canvases. So when I came back to the US, I said, oh, I was so inspired. I started looking and saying, even though I had space in my home, I really needed more space, elbow room, to be able to produce not just one painting. You wanted room to stretch. So I started looking, and I saw this building. I'd driven by it 100 times, and oh my God, it's such an eyesore. Upstate New York is dotted with contaminated, or if not contaminated, abandoned post-industry skeletons. It's like a desert full of skeleton buildings, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of unoccupied square feet. So I saw this building and I was like, why is it this building is like this still? So I called the code and they're like, that building has all these problems. And I said, okay, so who do I talk to? Oh, the DEC. So I speak to the Department of Environmental Conservation. I call them up, and the guy that I spoke to was, again, seemingly, this is a pattern. You find one person in the organization who is actually positive, who's forward thinking, who understands the vision. I said, I'm an artist, so I don't have great means. I have a lot of skills. I have vision. I said, I've done this on the south side of Elmira. I started rebuilding and refashioning this building. Then the March of 2008 crash came and we lost that, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do it again. What's the issue here? So he began to explain, yes, there's contamination. They didn't know where it was from. I said, well, send me the information you have. And then I get this report, this big, hefty scientific report that I think is, again, the problem that we face, where most people, when you look at something like this, a document that's really scientific, they get afraid and they run away. That's where you either have to hire scientists or lawyers to do this, XYZ. So I'm not in a position, so I do the due diligence. I read and I keep reading until I can try to begin to make sense of it. And I did, and I started to see problems in the report right back then. I saw this up gradient 300 foot away dry cleaner that was already remediated. They'd already fixed the problem there. They'd shut it down, bulldozed it, dug it up the whole line, and it was upstream. And I was like, well, it's obvious, because this building was never a dry cleaner. And I said, it's obvious where this contamination has come from. They had the maps, and you could see the subterranean or the groundwater flow direction from the other site right towards where I am. Mm-hmm. So I saw these issues that I immediately were like, this is where I can make an argument, because I knew that there was unfinished business. And he even said to me, we've never been able to properly get into the building because of who owned it or didn't own it and do our internal tests. And I said, great. I said, listen, I'm the artist. I'll renovate the building. I let you guys in. You do your tests. You indemnify me because you hold me harmless, because I obviously didn't cause the problem. And he said, oh, I think that'll be fine. New York State should be able to help you out without a problem. Well, he was just the project manager, not the lawyer. So when I spoke to the lawyer was folded arms, and he's like, and I said, what will it cost you just to indemnify me? I'm a guy who wants to make this eyesore in this upstate New York town we're crippled by economic depression up here. Anything that can contribute towards a facelift, towards progress, towards rehabilitating one of these dinosaur bones is good. So all you guys need to do is sign a piece of paper. Oh, and they and on. I was like, what? He was even saying, well, maybe you should look for another building. And I'm like, no. The minute they said that to me, I said, no, this is now bureaucracies that really bothers me. I said, because your mission is to facilitate what I'm trying to do. I'm part of the mission of the DEC, which is to rehabilitate and which is to re-inspire the economy. That's all part of the DEC mission. Not from this guy. So I ended up then saying, you know what, I'm going to take the plunge. I see enough chinks in the chain that if push comes to shove and we end up in a lawsuit, I know there are grounds there that I can get this easily examined and we can push forward and look for whatever it is that I'm looking for. I'm confident I'm going to get it because of what I discovered. That was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, a long time.
We'll take care of this easily. It's no problem. There's chinks in the armor. I got them all. We'll knock them out.
A strange experience when when I started to really understand what was going on, because now what it's boiled down to, and I'll share this with you, Jake, what I discovered was the best thing that I did. I knew there were problems back then, inconsistencies in the report that I could then force and argue. I knew that. 11 years later, I find the biggest one was staring me in the face, and I had not even realized what that was, except this summer, we had this was now after all these years, they've done testing. I've let them into the building. They've done testing in the building. They've done all these tests that they do. That's their job. But the classification issue, and this is where the real clincher is, that they have misclassified the severity of the contamination of the building. We had this public meeting with about 6 DEC officials this summer in June. And I went there with my son, and there was only like 2 people from the public. I mean, nobody cares or anything. It's just about all these officials there. And I sat there, and I knew the story very well. So I asked them these questions, and I'm like, so who is actually affected by this? And there was quiet. And I'm like, there's no vapor. There's no contamination in the air around the building, any adjacent building.
Just for clarity, Julian, there's what is it, class 1, 2, and 3?
There's 5 classes, but the main ones that are important are the first 3. And the first class is like, I'm going to use this analogy. The first class is like, in the 1700s, the British ships arrives on the shore of New York, and redcoats are disembarking by the thousands, and the Paul Revere rides on his horse, and the redcoats are coming. And there's an immediate, urgent threat that you have to, it's a spill, there's toxic. I mean, that's
primary one.
Primary one. Number 2 is like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The president discovers there's nuclear bombs over there, 90 miles away. They immediately respond by containment, by a blockade, by mobilization. They do all this type of thing where it's a significant threat, but it's not an imminent threat. And this threat is right over there. And back then they contained it they walled off Cuba with a blockade. They did all these things. So that is a great picture of a class 2 where you have a significant threat to the public, but it's not imminent. It's just,
right.
And you need to, and this is the problem, because they classified my building 20 years ago as a significant threat. And you're like, are you telling me that for 20 years, you've just sat by a significant threat to who? This is the issue. Now, the third class says, yes, there's contamination. It's not a threat to the public unless you dig up the dirt and eat the dirt.
Unless you screw with it.
It's taking care of itself. This is volatile organic compounds. They dissolve. They naturally, over time, they dissolve. It's dry cleaning fluid that was used in the dry cleanup stream. This stuff just evaporates. It just
freaking dry cleaners, right? I'm just teasing.
Yeah, I know.
But teasing all you dry cleaners.
Years ago, you know what they did with their used dry cleaning fluid? They dumped it down the drains.
Great. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,
they dumped it out the back door. There was no regulation.
For that reason, we give kudos to the Department of Environmental Conservation. Yeah, because they are doing good work that way, just like you said. But
yeah,
they classified your joint as
number 2.
Number 2.
So it's technically a significant threat. So at this public meeting, I had not yet connected the dots with significant threat. I was arguing other points still. And yet at the public meeting, I asked them about the threat. And I said to them clear, and I said, so, because there was one neighbor who was she wasn't friendly towards me. There's nobody around my building. There's nobody. I'm 150 feet away from the closest structure. To the northwest, east of me, there's nothing. South of me, there's one residence 150 feet away. And I said to them, so what is the contamination threat to the neighbors? And they went quiet, and there's none. There's 0. None in the air, none in the vapors. These things vaporize and go into the buildings. If dry cleaners next door to Joe, you can have this stuff vaporizing, coming up through like radon gas, coming up through your floorboards. Nothing, zip. And I said, so there's no threat to the public. And this one woman who was like really like gung-ho to get me. She's like, well, maybe we should look elsewhere then. I saw some barrels up the street over there, like burbling. She thought there was some contamination elsewhere. So the shift was obvious that they had proven to the public that there was no threat. And I was like, I expected them, to be honest, Jake, that they would, after that meeting, call me up and say, we've looked at everything. We've reassessed the situation. We've reassessed the threat. And that we have decided to drop it, no longer DEFCON 2. We're dropping to DEFCON 3. There's contamination, but there's nothing to do about it. It's just there. It's not harming anyone. It's not harming you. I said, I've lived in this building. I've been in this building for 10 years. I said, I've had my blood tested. I said, there's no contamination or threat to even the resident of the building. That was the funniest part in that meeting. This one guy, when I said that, his eyes like bugged out of his head. And this is another problem that happens with situations like this. They present the story to the public and the public panics.
Yeah.
They get afraid. They think, oh, it's radioactive, because there are dangerous sites. Oh, it's arsenic or PCBs or something really terrible. Again, it goes back to classification and communication with the public. This guy, I said to him, yeah, I lived in the building for like 6 months at one point. He's like, what? Like because he had been convinced by the news that it was this terrible, toxic site.
Yeah, it's off-gassing. You could have become a zombie.
2 heads. I went there saying, well, here I am. I'm like the guinea pig. And I said, I knew this because when I read the report in 2014, it said it clearly in there. There was no surf. There was no, you couldn't tell that there was a problem. They stumbled across the problem by accident because of the other site. There was no record here of a spill that needed to be blah, blah. There was years ago, there had been some petroleum spills from adjacent sites. And this very industrialized area had been contaminated by other sites again, but nothing to do with this. So that was the revelation, the aha moment for me was when I, in my studies, because on September the 5th, they sent me the hard-hitting letter rather than getting the call or the letter saying, we've decided not to pursue this. There's no threat. They're like,
they doubled down.
They doubled down. You have 30 days. And if you don't give us a plan that you're going to fix the problem yourself, we're going to commandeer the building. And in 120 days, they would take over the building to dig it up.
So this is interesting because this property went vacant 4 years before you bought it.
Years, yeah.
And so if it is such an environmental problem, why wouldn't the city of Elmira themselves or the DEC opt to take possession of said property, level the building, dig up the contaminant, so that they could resell the property if it's such a...
It wasn't. The city of Elmira kept their floats in the building at one point. They had all the city... They just built a building behind us, and they kept their floats in the building. So there isn't. This is the whole problem. And what it boils down to, again, is the overlap of this other property, the confusion, them... And this goes back to where I say there's either a great incompetence here, and I have encountered that. This is like the anecdotal example of the incompetence. When I arrived at that public meeting, the address they had written on the board welcoming people to the public library to discuss 714 Baldwin Street, it was the wrong address. They wrote like 423 Baldwin Street. And I stood there and I was like, am I at the right meeting? I said, maybe you're going to assign all the blame to this other property, because they got so many like little errors that they've made. Maybe incompetence, maybe just a blinded prosecutorial, like the lawyer he was always wanting to be the lawyer. And I'm like, I'm not the guy that dumped the stuff in the stream.
Right. Stop treating me like I'm the one that contaminated it.
That's how it felt since 2014 when I had spoke to Matt Dunham. He was the only guy that was positive and was like, yo, this is great. And I think what really grieves me more than anything is I wrote out my vision to them back then. I shared, as an artist, I shared my contracting experience of what I can do and how I can make this beautiful and how we can work together. And I said, we can tell a story to New York State and to inspire investors and other artists, because artists have long been known to move into abandoned areas, like in New York City. They went into the docks and they turned these huge commercial spaces into creative art spaces. And and economies and restaurants came, and the whole place boomed. And those loft apartments became $1 million apartments.
Yeah,
20
right.
years later. And so I said to them, we could work together and tell a great story and inspire people and educate people and dispel the fear and help people realize, yeah, the DEC will work with you. We have a department that if you're the artist who wants to do, we want to work with you and help you.
Yeah.
But other than that, as you just said, they double down and they have this prosecutorial attitude. And I'm like, this is just stupid, because I'm the guy that's trying to make, and I renovated. I'm in the office part of the building. This place was a bomb site.
Yeah.
It had been gutted. It had all the pipes ripped out of it. It was inside the building. There was all the ceiling. It had collapsed, and it was unreal what a disaster there was in this place. So I cleaned it up. It's beautiful now.
But when they sent you that letter, is that when they invoked the 6 NYCRR?
That's right. That's when they said, we're coming for you, and and they have the power that they can basically come in, take over your building. And like in the day of King George, when he would quarter his troops, I felt like they're going to quarter their scientists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, what a nerve. And I said, more than anything, once you realize the classification argument, you realize these people are barking up the wrong tree. And the other thing which they missed, which I just learned in my studies, thank God, there is a yearly requirement for the DEC to reevaluate the classification on every property.
Oh, annually.
Annually.
So you would have had 14
reclassification considerations.
Yeah.
And haven't had one. So that's a major problem. There are scientific problems. There are reading problems. There are a whole litany of issues. But the biggest, like I said, there are 3 criteria for them to consider classification 1, 2, or 3. One, is there legitimately a hazardous compound there, a chemical product? There's lots of them in this area, and there's lots of them, not just VOCs on my site. There's other stuff. There's all sorts of stuff around. Used to be a junkyard. So there's all sorts of stuff in the ground at levels that are not a significant threat. Number 2 that they needed to determine was, is there receptors? In other words, who are the targets of possible contamination? The groundwater, is it going to infect the wells, the drinking water of Elmira? Well, the closest well to me is 5,000 feet north upstream. And that was already contaminated by another, I think it was by a building north of them or the one north of me. But that's 5,000 feet upstream. It's like impossible for you to
It has nothing to do with you.
You can't do, and then the other one was contaminated by another dry cleaner on the west side of town, about a mile and 1.4 miles to my west, across the down gradient groundwater that's flowing into the river. The river is a mile behind me downstream. And so everything where I'm standing flows downstream towards the river on the surface and beneath the ground and the groundwater. So receptors, this building could never affect the groundwater, drinking water, the drinking water of the Elmira. So that's a receptor this never could do it. The other receptors are neighbors. Are there any neighbors that they've already said, no one. They've done all the tests. It affects nobody, doesn't reach, et cetera, et cetera. The levels are so minuscule above their accepted levels. It has no ability to even drift 20 feet and still be in any way contaminating. You know what I'm saying? It's tiny.
In your case, it's not. So in your case, it's not contaminating groundwater. It's not affecting wildlife. It is
in the groundwater, but it's not in the drinking water. The groundwater will flow into the river. And but it's at a level in the groundwater that if it flows 20 feet, it will dissipate. If it flows 40 feet or 100 feet, it will dissipate. There's no source.
Yeah, it's like measured in parts per million or parts per billion.
Correct.
Per foot or whatever. We have to deal with a lot of that stuff, and because we deal with pesticides here in Southern California in our home services business.
Excellent.
Shamelessly sponsored by Halo Home Services for all your termites and pest control needs.
And so you would have to consider that if when in any type of activity you're doing then.
Yeah, we have to consider all that. Yeah.
Yep. And that's the issue. The groundwater where I am, I've got the great thing about it is all the science that they did was most of it legitimate. So you can really, and there were different companies who did it. So you can get a really good balanced picture of it. The groundwater moves between 4 and 45 feet a year. It's very, very little movement. And so again, if it was to move at all, it would move only within a certain distance and it would dissipate just by itself. So there are a lot. Yeah.
So I mean, so it's interesting in your case because you got it for in 2014. Everything. Look, they didn't indemnify you. Maybe that should have been a deal breaker, whatever. But you really wanted the property. It seemed like it was going to be pretty easy. But now they file the paperwork doubling down on the issue, and the DEC claims you stored or leaked, claims that you stored or leaked toxic solvents.
I'm called a PRP. I'm a potentially responsible party.
How did they even come to that conclusion?
Yeah, and I wrote to them and said, how did you, to that letter I responded and I bulked it. I said, you're telling me to clean up when you're only calling me a potentially responsible party. How arbitrary it is, and this is how stupid the whole thing is. The analogy that I used was like you see a rundown property on a street with other properties that are nice, and you speak to the neighbors and they're like, it's ghosts in there and everyone's afraid, and so no one buys the property because of these. And you're like, whatever, you see this, it's beautiful and you've got potential, and you buy the property for a good price, which I did, and then you renovate it. And they tell you the story. Yes, like 50 years ago, there was a guy named Mr. Baldwin there, and Mr. and Mrs. Baldwin, and she disappeared. And nobody knows where she went, and they think he killed her, but then he left town, and nobody ever knows, and now there's ghosts, and so all these type of weirds, which it was. It's like a fear story around this building.
Yeah.
And then so you buy the building because you're like not affected by that. You're like, get on with the life. Right. You look at it's like, just get on with it. Yeah. And then you're renovating, and one day you're digging in the basement, and crack, you hit a skull. You start digging the skulls and bones down there, and you're like, "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Baldwin's buried in the basement." you call up the sheriff, and you're like, "Oh, I found Mrs. Baldwin's the skeleton, the bone." The police come and the press, and they're like, "Woo!" And they cordon off the property and the whole thing, and you're like, "Great, we could solve this problem." And within 5 minutes, the sheriff walks up to you and says, "Mr. Raven, you're under arrest for the murder of Mrs. Baldwin."
Stop it.
This is how arbitrary it is.
That's arbitrary. Yeah.
This is what we're dealing with. So when they called me a potentially reliable person, I'm like, you're telling me to clean it up, even though you're not saying I'm the responsible person, but I said, go pound sand. I said, I'm not doing this. And so this is the type of stupidity that they do. And maybe it's maybe it just goes back to the procedures inside the DEC that bind them to they can't think. They just have to. He's the registered owner, so we're going to slap him with this.
There's some, what it is that they should have cleaned that up years ago, and they didn't. They know they're in the wrong, and they want to give you the property, but they think they can get you to clean it up so they don't have to put out any expense.
Well, that I don't know if that is exactly it. The expense is $600,000 on the taxpayer's dime, and they have to justify doing that. And you're like, there are a lot of ways to spend $600,000 locally that could really help this place. Yeah. This place doesn't need it. That's the point.
Right.
The point is that this is a class 3, and by the 3 criteria, like I said, there is evidence of product here, but there is no threat. And then the source is the third aspect. The source is who's responsible for it, meaning where did it come from? All of the reports, they say they have no idea because the use of this building didn't qualify for it to have that chemical here. It was they said it was a textile transportation location where they stored and transported textiles, where they had gasoline refilling station for trucks, but never these products. So it's like, well, so how did it get here then? You're telling me now that we have no doubt, and they changed their story already because I already challenged them on. They said it was a dry cleaner. I said it's not a dry cleaner. I did the research. I got all that. I presented it, and they're like, okay, it must have been storage or something. I said, well, where do you get that from? Do you have any receipts? Do you have any proof that they stored this product here? nothing. So the source question is, and this is where it comes down to, in the sense that in my arguments for the reclassification, which is what I'm doing, even on a long shot that they said, oh, there must be the source there. And I don't believe anybody could ever conclude it because there's no proof of it. The dumping theory, which I have, which is at that time, this stuff was dumped in the garbage. And it wasn't just the waste liquid. It was all the waste sludge. It was all the waste filters from the machinery. Across the street, they were using this chemical since 1970. So they were using that chemical for 50 years, 55 years, or whatever it was. And maybe it was 40 when they shut down finally, I think it was. But they used that product for so long that they would then, where were they dumping their used perk? Where were they dumping their used dry cleaner fluid? They weren't just leaking it into the ground where they were dumping all the, because when you take your garment to a dry cleaner, the chemical, which is either PCE mainly, which is this chemical, when you get that weird smell on the dry cleaning on a shirt.
Oh yeah.
Musty smell, that weird, that's perk. And you wear it on your body. I mean, that's what it is. The shirt is liquid washed in this chemical and dried in a machine. It used to be a different machine, but now they're the same machines. It's that chemical. But after a certain amount of cycles, the chemical is spent, and they take that chemical and they used to just dump it down the drain, or they dump it across the street, bag, and because this was a trash site all around me, it was a junkyard. The possibility that they just drove their stuff and dumped it over here, again, it's a theory, but it's huge. And so that to me is the answer, that's how this stuff got into this property or near this property. And
still had nothing to do with you.
No, absolutely. And the best part about it, more than anything, is even if they did try to pin a source on or near this property, the receptors, there's none there. The law says there has to be people that are threatened, to be a significant threat to who? Yeah. It's not the squirrels. The squirrels are running around as happy as can be. It's as green as you can be. It's a beautiful place. Nature is thriving. The environment is thriving. So where's the threat? And that is where, by the grace of God, on November 19th at the New York Supreme Court on the Hazlitt Building in Elmira, New York at 9:30 a.m., that is where I'm going to argue. And I hope
this November 9th.
19th.
19th.
Yep.
All right. This November
it's
19th.
Order to show cause hearing. They have to turn up and show the judge that their class 2 classification is justified.
Okay.
So the judge he's seen the arguments and he's like, no, let's get them in here. Let's see what they say.
Oh, very interesting. So that's a good reason for this update, because when we get this out, this will give people time to pray about it. You can contact the DEC Elmira, New York, and let them know that you're, Team Julian.
And I think, Jay, going back to the point that you brought up at the beginning, and again, this is why I do things like this, and I feel compelled to do it, is that when the government fails and falls on us, we have to stand up. You just cannot take things at face value, and people make mistakes. People can be incompetent. People can be ideologically driven, where they're using, like in my other case, where they're using the power of their position to approve or disapprove of content that they like or dislike. Human beings are human beings, and everybody has weakness where they're susceptible. And our job as citizens is to say, hold on a second. Well, imagine if I didn't say anything. Imagine if I allowed them to go forth with their thing and just rolled over, and they dig up and they say, and then eventually they say, well, Mr. Raven, you're the only one that we could find to blame. So here's $600,000 that you owe us. We owe the taxpayer because we dug up and cleaned up your property. And I didn't say, and that's the point, to say, if we don't speak and question and say, excuse me, politely, righteously, with the correct attitude. This isn't any type of animosity. This is just saying, this is not right. We need to see it done correctly. Why?
Yeah.
Because we want to see our society thrive, because people have confidence in government. This is how people lose confidence. They're so sick and tired. I get sick and tired of it. We're like, I can't believe it. Well, if you had been at that meeting, my son, who's at college, he was shaking his head after. He's like, Dad, he's like, did they really just say what I heard, basically? Did they really speak out of both sides of their mouth? He says, they were saying there's no threat. What's the deal with this property? And
Right.
I said, this is the bizarre part about it. And
they should have reclassified it then.
After that meeting, they should have just said, oops, sorry. They should have said, this is not an issue. It's no threat to anyone. We admitted it ourselves.
Yeah.
And I said this to them, and I'm like, so are you going to back? Nope,
not going to back up. In fact, we're going to double down and then try to get you to clean it up at your own expense. Crazy. That's just crazy talk. It's,
bureaucraties, dear brother.
That is a bureaucrat kind of situation that happens for sure. And it's like you said at the beginning, these people do, by and large, they do good work. Some of them are, they get tied up between the lawyers and the politicians and and when we say bureaucratic or bureaucraties, we're talking about the system interwoven together in order to get stuff done for the common good. And there's so much red tape and there's so many people saying so many different things that nobody ever moves.
Yep. And I think that gets back to the heart of the problem of saying somewhere along the process here, whether it's the commissioner, which they have a new commissioner now, there has to be people who can look at a case before they sign off on it and say, you know what, we really need to listen to this, because here's this person. I doubt that they have many artists writing them all these letters and emails and then inviting them and saying, look, this is a great opportunity. Great. What does it cost you? Just sign a paper and say, Mr. Raven, it's not of your problem. This has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for cooperating. Let's tell a great story. And that's not what happens. And again, it goes back to that whole mindset thing. So I hope that my litigation is going to reveal that. I will file what's called a FOIL, like a FOIA report, a request for emails, and I can get all of what's been going on behind the scenes. And maybe that will reveal something. Maybe it'll just say, no, they're incompetent, or maybe it's just more sinister than that, unfortunately. So,
well, hopefully it's not more sinister than that.
Yeah, you don't, your mind plays tricks on you and you can think all sorts of things, but
they're covering up their own dead bodies. The government was run by mafiosos and they used that building to hide the evidence.
Yeah, exactly. You could go down and I just refuse to do that. The Bible says, 2 Timothy 2:22 and 23, it says, refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, for they produce quarrels. And I've put that around my mind as a steel trap. I said, I don't go down that road. It prevents me of all the stupidity in this world.
Yeah.
Stick with the facts, stick with what is true, love what's true, and we'll always know how to discern by the grace of God what's truth and what's error.
Yeah, that's what I go to Philippians 4. It says, whatever is right, true, pure, and lovely, think on these things. And I go, so if it's not true, you're right. Don't think on them. They're fun from time to time to go down a rabbit hole and, go down the conspiracy trail. So maybe we shouldn't, give, what is that saying that says, don't call something, I don't know, devious when it's simply, incompetence or something. It's like some saying like that.
I don't know the same, but I get it. Yeah, and that's exactly the point. It's a discipline of the mind. And in this day and age, that's another takeaway, that placing the helmet of salvation on our head is like a trap. We put God's word on our mind, and so we don't spill over into deception and delusion. And so, I do love the truth. It's probably part of why I get driven into these situations, and then it's fascinating to me. It is science and geology and this chemistry, and it's all these things that are interesting and that you can really benefit by learning from them. And then how do you then take that to say, this is a lesson learned that will benefit my fellow citizen, to say we can become better citizens and have better communities and better civic life and enjoyment if we all take up this type of an attitude, rather than doing nothing, getting mad and angry for years, which most people do. They sit back and they're apathetic, and then they blow up in rage and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
The whole system blows up instead of saying no, progressively, consistently pushing, testing, as the scripture says, test and see that of what is true, hold fast to what is true. And that those Christian principles should apply to everything we do and should contribute towards a better community and society where we live. So that's the goal.
Yeah. Is there anywhere that people can show support, sign a petition, call a congressman, anything like that?
Well, my website is 714 Baldwin Street, street.com for that story. Congressmen, they won't get involved. They because it's a legal issue, they'll just sit on the sidelines. The media, there's a good story that came out today in the local paper, which is great, shining the light on the issue. They've already written 2 or 3 times about it, and this was actually a pretty good story. What I read of it was pretty good. So you can go to the website and you can see my story. And I usually end up just doing this by myself because I'm like, if people want to support, prayers are always appreciated and above all things, the most beneficial. If people want to buy my artwork, they can do that, which is always beneficial as well. And other than that, I think do it where you are. And take that energy and make the world a better place where you are. Yeah. Because again, if we all did it, we wouldn't be suffering like we are, because there's a lot of hardship going on right now because I think of ultimately, in my opinion, ineffective citizenry, where we have abdicated our authority and role, and then we delegate it to someone to fix for us. And it's like, I think the American model was we the people, those magic words, we the people. That's an amazing start to an amazing story.
Yeah. Amen. And they definitely should go out. I mean, so julianraven.com is where they can see your artwork, and that is phenomenal stuff. So anybody that's got room for a big, beautiful piece at their house needs to go there like pronto. And if they don't have anything that on there, they can commission go to they can commission you to do work,
or they can go to the other site, which is ravenartgallery.store, and you'll see the links on the different sites. And that's right now I'm updating it, and I think there was a problem on the front page of it, but there has a lot of my work where you can buy prints of it, and you can buy prints of all different types and photography, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's another way. I'm trying to get that up to speed, just in the event that someone may wish to jump along and help push the boat down the stream.
Yeah, very nice. And we'll put all the links and everything in the description as usual. And of course, up somewhere, you'll see a link to the previous video that Julian and I did together, talking all about art. If you want to learn about art, he is the man to listen to. So Julian, thanks again for coming, man. I appreciate it.
Jake, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
If you enjoyed this show, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. For more information about Jake, log on to jakegiffen.com and find him on all social media platforms. Until next time, peace and power be yours.